the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. You learn a new word on a Monday, something you're fairly certain you've never encountered before, obscure enough that you had to look it up. By Wednesday, you've seen it 3 times. In an article, in a conversation, on the back of a book someone was reading on the train. It feels like the universe is doing something deliberate. It isn't. Your brain is. This is called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, or more precisely the frequency illusion, and the mechanism behind it is less mysterious than the experience feels. Your brain processes an enormous amount of sensory information every second, far more than consciousness can actually handle. To manage the load, it filters aggressively, deciding in real time what to surface and what to discard. Most of what surrounds you never fully registers. Your brain decided it wasn't worth your attention. When you learn something new, particularly something that carries a little charge, a word that surprised you, a name that came up unexpectedly, the brain flags it, elevates its priority. And suddenly the filter lets it through every time it appears, when before it would have been quietly discarded. The word was always there. You just weren't cleared to see it. Phosphines. Press your palms gently against your closed eyes and hold them there. Within a few seconds, something appears. Rings of light, shifting geometric patterns, bursts of colour blooming and contracting in the dark. Not random static, structured shapes, moving with a logic that feels almost deliberate. Stars that aren't stars. Light with no source. These are called phosphines, and they appear because the retina, it turns out, doesn't need actual light to produce the experience of seeing it. Physical pressure on the eyeball stimulates the photoreceptors directly, bypassing the usual process entirely. The brain receives the signal, interprets it as light, and shows you something. The same thing happens when you sneeze, or take a hard impact to the head, or stand up too fast. Any physical event that disturbs the retina or the visual cortex can produce them. They're the reason getting hit in the head makes people see stars. That's not a metaphor. The impact generates real visual experience. Hypnagogia. Famous Salvador Dali kept a metal key in his hand while he slept in a chair. Not because of any particular attachment to the key, because of what happened the moment he dropped it. The clatter against the floor would wake him. And in the half second before full consciousness returned, he'd catch whatever had been moving through his mind in that in-between place. Then he'd paint it. Thomas Edison did the same thing, apparently. Steel balls in his palm, bowl on the floor beneath. He called that threshold state the source of his best ideas. Both men, independently, built systems to harvest what most people sleep straight through. That state has a name. Hypnagogia, the borderland between wakefulness and sleep, where the brain is conscious enough to experience, but too far gone to edit. Faces appear that don't belong to anyone you know. Voices say things in languages you don't speak. Entire landscapes materialize with the texture of somewhere real. What's happening physiologically is that the brain's filtering systems are going offline in stages. The parts that regulate logic and continuity shutting down before the parts that generate imagery and sensation. So experience keeps arriving, but the mechanism that organizes it into sense has already left. What remains is raw. Most people pass through it in seconds and remember nothing. Some, like artists, learn to linger there. Sleep paralysis. Every culture that has ever existed came up with a name for it. Medieval Europe called it a demon sitting on your chest. West African tradition described a witch riding you in the night. Newfoundland has a name for it. The old hag. Japan, China, Brazil, Turkey. Different languages, different centuries, no contact with each other. All the same story. But what exactly is it? Well, sleep paralysis happens in the gap between REM sleep and waking. Your brain switches on before the paralysis your body needs for dreaming has lifted. You're conscious, fully conscious, but nothing below your neck is responding. And because part of your brain is still inside a dream, it fills the room with something. A shape in the corner, a pressure on the chest, breathing that isn't yours. The fear is real. The threat is not. Your own mind is doing it. What's hard to shake is the consistency of the hallucinations across people who have never spoken to each other. Not just the paralysis, the presence. Almost everyone describes feeling watched, something there in the room that shouldn't be. Researchers think the intruder hallucination is the brain's threat detection system misfiring while still half dreaming, generating a predator because that's what the system defaults to when it can't account for why the body won't move. Phantom vibration syndrome. There's a version of this you've almost certainly had. Your phone is in your pocket. You feel it buzz. You check it. Nothing there. You put it back. It happens again an hour later. After a while, you stop being surprised by it. You just check, find nothing, move on. What's strange is how recent this is as a human experience. A generation ago, nobody felt phantom phone vibrations because nobody carried phones. The sensation didn't exist. And now, for the majority of people who carry a smartphone regularly, studies put it somewhere between 68 and 90%. It's just part of life. What happened is straightforward, even if it doesn't feel that way. Your nervous system learned. Every buzz that ever meant something, a message you were waiting for, a call that mattered, quietly registered. The brain filed it as important. Stay alert for that signal. And then, because the brain is always trying to be efficient, it started anticipating it, generating the sensation before the phone produced it, trying to get ahead of something that matters. The phone trained you and then handed the job back to your body. Déjà vu. It lasts maybe 3 seconds, sometimes less. There's no warning and no aftermath, just this sudden absolute certainty. Mid-conversation, mid-staircase, mid-ordinary Tuesday. That you have been in this exact moment before. Not somewhere like it. This one. These words, this light, this specific sequence. And then it dissolves and you're just standing there, slightly unsettled, with nothing to show for it. The science is less mystical than the feeling suggests. Your brain processes new experiences through 2 systems running in parallel, one handling real-time perception, one filing things as memory. Déjà vu appears to be what happens when the memory system fires slightly ahead of schedule, tagging a moment as familiar before the moment has finished arriving. The present gets labelled as the past before it's even done being the present. So there's no actual memory underneath it, nothing to retrieve, just the familiarity signal going off in an empty room. It happens more when you're tired, more when you're overstimulated. Researchers have also found it becomes less frequent with age. Younger brains still finding their footing seem to slip between the tracks more easily. Misophonia. Someone at a nearby table is chewing. Normally, the way people chew. Nothing unusual about it, and something in you tightens immediately. Not mild irritation, something more like the early physical signs of panic. Your jaw locks, your focus collapses. Every other thing in the room disappears, and the only thing left is that sound, which is getting worse with every repetition, even though nothing about it has changed. That's misophonia. Literally, hatred of sound, though that translation undersells it. Sufferers describe it less as irritation and more as an involuntary hijacking. The trigger sounds are almost always ordinary and almost always involve other people's bodies, chewing, breathing, clicking a pen. The specific sound varies from person to person, but the response is consistent, immediate, intense, and almost impossible to override through willpower. Exploding head syndrome. You're right on the edge of sleep. That specific heaviness where the room starts to blur at the edges and your thoughts stop making complete sense. And then a sound detonates inside your head. A gunshot. A door slamming so hard the wall should have cracked. A thunderclap from directly overhead. You sit up. Heart going. Room completely quiet. Nothing moved. Most people who experience this spend a moment genuinely convinced something is wrong with them. Stroke maybe. Something breaking inside. They lie back down, heart still running, and don't tell anyone because there's no good way to describe it. What actually happened is that your brain, in the middle of its shutdown sequence for sleep, misfired. The auditory neurons didn't quiet gradually. They discharged all at once, producing a sound that has no external source, but registers in the body with the full physical weight of something real. Harmless. Over in under a second. No damage. No lingering effect. Nothing to find on a scan. Nobody knows exactly why it happens. It tends to cluster, showing up several nights in a row and then disappearing for months. Hypnagogic jerks. You were almost there. The heaviness had spread through your whole body. The thoughts were getting loose and disconnected. Sleep was maybe 30 seconds away. And then your leg kicked hard enough to shake the bed, and suddenly you're wide awake, heart slightly elevated, staring at the ceiling. Most people's first instinct is to feel vaguely embarrassed, even alone. It's called a hypnagogic jerk or a sleep start. The leading theory is that as your muscles release tension on the way into sleep, your brain misreads the signal, interprets the sudden drop in muscle activity as a fall, and fires a recovery response before it can think it through. The jerk is your body catching itself from a drop that wasn't happening. There's a second theory that doesn't have the same scientific consensus but is harder to forget once you've heard it. Our primate ancestors slept in trees. A sudden, uncontrolled muscle release at the wrong moment meant falling. The reflex, over millions of years, may have existed to catch sleeping bodies before they slipped off branches in the dark, which would make the hypnagogic jerk a survival mechanism that outlasted the trees, the branches, and every habitat that made it necessary, and now just startles you awake in a completely safe room for no reason. It happens more when you're overtired or over-caffeinated. The harder the transition into sleep, the more likely the misfire. Earworms. It's been 4 hours. You have not chosen to think about this song. You are not particularly fond of this song. And yet here it is again, playing from somewhere just behind your conscious thoughts. The same 8 bars on repeat, slightly too loud to ignore and completely immune to being told to stop. The technical term is involuntary musical imagery. The informal term is earworm. And what makes it genuinely strange is how little control you have over it once it starts. The brain's auditory cortex, researchers have found, doesn't distinguish clearly between music you're hearing and music you're remembering. When a song gets lodged, the same neural regions activate as if the song were actually playing, which is why it can feel so physically present, even in complete silence. What tends to get stuck are songs with a specific kind of structure, simple, repetitive, melodic phrases. An interval pattern that feels slightly unresolved, close to completing itself but not quite landing. The brain pattern completion machine that it is keeps looping back to finish what the song started, and the song never quite finishes. High stress and fatigue make it worse. Hearing a fragment of a song, 6 seconds on the radio, someone humming in a corridor, is enough to start the loop. The most effective way to stop one, according to researchers, is to finish it. Play the whole song through. Let it resolve. Give your brain the ending it keeps reaching for. The Mandela Effect. Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. There is a memory of it. The funeral coverage, the news broadcasts, the international mourning. Clear, detailed, specific. Shared, as it turned out, by a significant number of people who have never met each other and arrived at the memory independently. The same man, some say, was released from prison in 1990 and died in 2013 at his home at the age of 95. The memory is false. The people who hold it are not lying and not confused in any ordinary sense. They remember something that did not happen, in detail, with the same certainty they remember things that did. This is the Mandela Effect, the phenomenon of large groups of people sharing the same specific false memory. Named by paranormal researcher Fiona Broome, who discovered in 2009 that her detailed memory of Mandela's prison death was shared by an unexpected number of others. Troxler's fading. Find a fixed point on a wall, a nail, a small mark, anything small enough to focus on, and hold your gaze there, completely still. Don't let your eyes drift. Within about 20 seconds, the things around that point start to disappear. Not all at once. The edges first, then progressively closer in. Objects you can see perfectly clearly. The moment you move your eyes simply cease to register while your gaze holds. They don't blur. They don't darken. They're just gone, replaced by a kind of visual silence. This is Troxler's fading, documented by a Swiss physician named Ignaz Paul Vital Troxler in 1804, who noticed that stable, unmoving images in peripheral vision gradually vanish from conscious perception. What it reveals is something most people prefer not to think about too directly. The eye is in constant motion, tiny involuntary movements called microsaccades. And those movements are what keep the visual world stable and present. The moment input from a region of the visual field stops changing, the brain starts discounting it. Why process something that hasn't moved, hasn't changed, requires no response? The neurons adapt, the signal fades, and your brain quietly removes it from the picture. Lucid dreaming. In 2021, researchers at the Osnabrück Institute for Cognitive Science in Germany made contact with someone who was asleep. Not metaphorically. The sleeping participant, trained in lucid dreaming, received a math problem through an audio signal while in REM sleep, computed the answer, and communicated it back to the researchers through a prearranged sequence of eye movements. The researchers recorded it. The participant woke up with no memory of the exchange. A conversation had taken place with a dreaming brain. Lucid dreaming is literally the state of becoming consciously aware, mid-dream, that you're dreaming. For most people, it happens accidentally. Something in the dream breaks logic badly enough that awareness briefly surfaces. For trained lucid dreamers, it's deliberate. They move through constructed environments with full knowledge that none of it is real, and varying degrees of control over what happens next. What makes it neurologically strange is the combination it requires. REM sleep, the stage where the brain is most active and dreams most vividly, normally comes with the prefrontal cortex largely offline, the region responsible for self-awareness and rational thought. Lucid dreaming appears to reactivate specific parts of it while leaving the dream state intact. Two things that don't normally coexist, running simultaneously. Phantom limb pain. The limb is gone. This is not in dispute. The patient knows it. The medical record confirms it. The absence is visible and complete. And yet the pain arriving from that absent place is entirely real. Burning, cramping, a feeling of the fingers being crushed, or the foot twisted at an angle it was never meant to hold. Vivid, specific, located precisely in something that no longer exists. This is phantom limb pain. And for a long time, medicine had very little to offer it, partly because the mechanism made no intuitive sense. You cannot treat pain in a limb that isn't there. What was eventually understood is that the pain isn't coming from the limb, it's coming from the brain's map of the limb. A detailed neural representation built over years of use that doesn't update when the limb is removed. The map still exists. It still receives signals and generates experience. Crucially, it can no longer receive sensory feedback from the real limb to calibrate those signals, so some of its outputs go unregulated. The result is pain generated entirely within the nervous system, with no injury at its source. So in the 1990s, neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran developed a treatment so simple it seemed almost embarrassing. A mirror positioned so that the reflection of the intact limb appeared to occupy the space of the missing one. Patients moved the real limb while watching the reflection. The brain, receiving visual feedback it had been missing, began to update. For some patients, pain that had been untreatable for years began to ease within weeks. The brain was shown an illusion. It accepted the illusion as evidence and corrected itself accordingly. Cotard's delusion. There is a condition, documented and named and sitting in the medical literature without apology, in which a person becomes sincerely convinced that they are dead, not metaphorically, not as an expression of depression or disconnection. Dead, non-existent. The organs have stopped working or have been removed or have rotted away. The blood is gone. Some patients stop eating because dead people don't require food. Some gravitate toward graveyards because that is where dead people are. And the logic, internally, is sound. Jules Cotard, the French neurologist who catalogued it in 1880, described a patient he called Mademoiselle X, who denied the existence of most of her body, believed she needed neither food nor water, and was convinced she had been condemned to eternal life without the inconvenience of actually being alive. She eventually died of starvation. The neuroscience, when it arrived, pointed toward a failure, a disconnection between perception and emotional response, but extended beyond faces to the entire felt sense of being alive. The sense of aliveness, it turns out, is something the brain actively generates. A continuous, mostly unexamined signal confirming your own existence and presence. In Cotard's patients, that signal's absent. And into that absence, the most coherent explanation the mind can assemble is this: that it has ended.